HOA Karen sold my property without permission, now my lawyer is crippling them. The morning started like any other for David Miller. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through his kitchen, mingling with the faint scent of petunias from the window box. He was a creature of habit, David, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of his suburban life. He'd lived in this house, a charming split level with a spacious backyard, for 15 years. It was more than just a house, it was the repository of countless memories, the quiet witness to his triumphs and heartbreaks, the very foundation of his existence. He poured himself a mug, a heavy, chipped ceramic that felt just right in his hand, and ambled towards the front door to grab the morning paper. The sun, still low in the sky, cast long, lazy shadows across his meticulously maintained lawn. That's when he saw it. A large, white, professionally printed sign, firmly staked into his front yard, right between his prize-winning roses and the stately oak. It read, in bold, uncompromising black letters, sold. David blinked. Once. Twice. He squinted, as if the sunlight were playing tricks on his eyes, or perhaps he hadn't quite woken up yet. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. Still there. Sold. And beneath it, a name he didn't recognize, Prestige Realty Group. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. This had to be a mistake. A prank. He walked slowly towards the sign, his coffee forgotten, cooling in his hand. He reached out, touching the slick plastic, feeling the unsettling reality of it. This wasn't a joke. It was real. Just as he was trying to process this surreal sight, a large moving truck, emblazoned with the logo of Swift Movers, rumbled down his quiet street and pulled directly into his driveway. David stood frozen, staring as the back ramp lowered with a metallic groan. Two burly men in overalls hopped out, followed by a beaming couple in their late 30s, holding hands and looking around with an air of excited ownership. The woman, with a chic bob and a wide smile, pointed towards David's rose bushes. "Oh, honey, aren't those just divine? I can already picture our patio set right here." David's jaw felt like it was wired shut. His mind raced, struggling to reconcile what his eyes were seeing with the undeniable fact that this was his house. His house. He paid the mortgage. He paid the taxes. He pruned those roses himself. "Excuse me," David managed, his voice a reedy croak, barely recognizable to himself. The couple turned, their smiles faltering slightly as they noticed him. "Oh, good morning," the man said, a little too cheerfully. "You must be the neighbor. We just bought the place." He gestured grandly towards David's house, towards the sold sign, towards the very porch David had walked out of moments ago. The knot in David's stomach twisted into a painful vice. "No," he said, his voice gaining a shaky strength. "No, you didn't. This is my house." The woman's smile vanished, replaced by a look of polite confusion, then a hint of annoyance. "I beg your pardon. We closed on this property last Friday. The deed is in our name." She held up a thick envelope, almost defensively. David felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. "That's impossible. I live here. I've lived here for 15 years. "Well, clearly there's been some mix-up," the man said, his tone beginning to harden. "Perhaps you have the wrong address. This is 1427, Elm Street." David stared at his own front door, at his own house number, clearly visible. "This is 1427, Elm Street. And it's my house." He gestured wildly towards the house, his arms trembling. The woman sighed, pulling out her phone. "Look, sir, I don't know what to tell you. We have all the paperwork. We bought this house fair and square from a Ms. Brenda Cunningham, the president of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association." Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. David had never heard of it. His neighborhood wasn't part of an HOA. He'd specifically checked before buying, wanting to avoid the notorious busybody rules and regulations. "There is no HOA here." David exclaimed, his voice rising in disbelief and anger. And I don't know any Brenda Cunningham. The man stepped forward, his face darkening. Listen, we're just trying to move into our new home. If you have a problem, take it up with whoever sold you a house that was already legally purchased by us. Maybe you're thinking of another property? I'm not thinking of another property. David roared, his composure finally snapping. This is my property. And if you step 1 foot inside with your belongings, I'm calling the police. The new occupants exchanged a worried glance. We have a legal right to be here, the woman insisted, though her voice wavered slightly. Before David could argue further, he watched, aghast, as one of the movers, oblivious to the unfolding drama, began wrestling a massive couch out of the truck. It was being moved into his house. His sanctuary. His home. A primal scream of outrage built in David's chest. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a fight-or-flight response that left him trembling. He knew, with chilling certainty, that he needed help. Real help. Legal help. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling, and dialed the one person he knew could cut through this Kafkaesque nightmare, Alexis Thorne, his lawyer, and more importantly, his oldest friend. Alexis Thorne was a force of nature. She had a razor-sharp mind, a wit that could disarm a grizzly bear, and a legal tenacity that had earned her the nickname, the Velvet Hammer, in local courthouse circles. When David's frantic, near-incoherent call came in, describing strangers moving into his house, Alexis's first reaction was to assume a misunderstanding, a property line dispute at worst. Then David mentioned the sold sign, the HOA, and a name he'd never heard of. That's when Alexis's lawyer senses began to tingle. David, calm down, breathe, Alexis instructed, her voice cool and steady, a stark contrast to David's near-panicked breaths on the other end of the line. Tell me exactly what you see. Who is this, Brenda Cunningham? David recounted the absurd scene in his front yard, the moving truck, the bewildered buyers, the audacious sold sign. She told them she was the president of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, Alexis. I swear, there's no HOA here. Alexis hummed thoughtfully. All right. Don't engage them further. Don't make any threats. Just stay put, make sure they don't damage anything, and don't let them throw your stuff out. I'm on my way. Do you have your original deed, property tax statements, anything proving ownership? Of course. They're in my office, or what used to be my office, David said, his voice cracking. He was standing on his lawn, watching a family he'd never met unpack their lives into his home. The sheer violation was overwhelming. 40 minutes later, Alexis's sleek black sedan pulled up to David's curb. She stepped out, a formidable figure in a sharp pantsuit, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She took in the scene, the moving truck, the nervous new occupants, the sold sign, and a visibly distraught David. David, she said, her gaze softening as she approached him, then hardened as she looked towards the house. Let's get the police involved first to de-escalate this. Then we'll figure out who this Brenda Cunningham is. The police officer, a young man named Officer Miller, no relation, arrived shortly after. He listened patiently to David's incredulous story, then to the equally bewildered account of the new buyers, a couple named Sarah and Mark Jenkins, who presented their notarized deed and closing documents. Look, officer, Mark Jenkins said, holding up a thick binder. We have all the paperwork right here. We bought this house from the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. They said the previous owner abandoned it. The grass was overgrown, it was an eyesore, they said. David scoffed. Overgrown grass. I mowed that lawn last Saturday. And I just watered those roses this morning. Officer Miller, clearly out of his depth, looked from the deed to David, then back to the sign. This is a civil matter, folks. It looks like a legitimate transaction on paper, Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Miller, I understand your distress, but unless there's proof of forced entry or immediate danger, we can't get involved in a property dispute beyond keeping the peace. You need to sort this out with a lawyer. He looked at Alexis. Looks like you've got your work cut out for you, counselor. Alexis nodded, a grim line forming on her lips. Understood, officer. Thank you for your time. Once the police left, Alexis turned to the Jenkins. Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, while I appreciate you have documents, my client has lived in this house for 15 years and has never received any notice of an HOA, let alone any action to sell his home. This is a fraudulent sale. I advise you not to proceed with unpacking your belongings until this is resolved. Anything you move in here could be subject to immediate removal by court order. Sarah Jenkins looked terrified. Fraudulent? But we paid good money. We used a reputable title company. We'll investigate everything, Alexis assured them, though her tone was firm. For now, consider yourselves victims of a scam as well. You need to contact your own lawyer. With that, Alexis steered David away from the house, back to her car. All right, David. First things first. Let's go to my office. We need every piece of paper you have related to that house, deeds, tax bills, utility bills, mortgage statements. Everything. As they drove, Alexis was already on her phone, barking orders to her paralegal. Pull up every single registered HOA in this county. Search for Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. Also, I need a deep dive on a Brenda Cunningham. Check public records, property transactions, anything at all. David felt a sliver of hope ignite in his chest. Alexis was on it. If anyone could untangle this insane mess, it was her. The following days were a blur of legal filings, phone calls, and mounting disbelief. Alexis, true to her reputation, was relentless. She began by requesting records from the county clerk's office, the office responsible for registering homeowners associations. Well, this is interesting, Alexis said, leaning back in her chair a few days later, a smirk playing on her lips. David sat opposite her, nervously fiddling with a stress ball. What is it? David asked, heart pounding. Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, Alexis announced, holding up a printed document. Doesn't exist. Not registered. Never has been. David blinked. What? But they showed the Jenkins a deed and everything. That's what makes this so deliciously fraudulent, David, Alexis said, a glint of amusement in her eyes despite the gravity of the situation. Brenda Cunningham, or whoever she is, created a phantom HOA. A ghost organization. She likely forged those deeds, probably had some poor, unsuspecting notary public legitimize them without proper due diligence. The Jenkins are victims, no doubt, but so are you, obviously. Alexis continued, we also found Brenda Cunningham. She's listed as the owner of a small property management company, Cunningham Property Solutions, based out of a strip mall office across town. No legitimate real estate license on record, by the way. Just a business license for property management. So, she just picked my house? David asked, still struggling to comprehend the audacity. It seems so, Alexis replied. My paralegal, Sarah, did some digging. Apparently, Cunningham Property Solutions specializes in distressed property revitalization and community beautification projects. Sounds like a cover for targeting what she perceives as neglected homes. Your overgrown grass comment from the Jenkins makes sense now. She probably drove by, saw a slightly unkempt lawn, and decided you were an easy target for an abandonment claim. David felt a fresh wave of anger. She thought I abandoned my home because my grass was a little long. I was on vacation for 2 weeks, for crying out loud. Precisely, Alexis said, nodding. This woman is a piece of work. No legitimate HOA can declare a property abandoned based on lawn care, let alone sell it, without extensive legal process, including multiple notices, attempts to contact the owner, and typically a court order. None of which happened here. So what now? David asked. Now, Alexis said, her voice shifting to a serious, focused tone, we serve her. We file a lawsuit against Brenda Cunningham for fraud, quiet title, wrongful eviction, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We'll also name Meadowbrook Homeowners Association as a phantom entity in the suit, just to make sure all bases are covered. We'll also be seeking punitive damages. And I guarantee you, we will bankrupt this woman. The word bankrupt hung in the air, a stark promise of retribution. David felt a surge of dark satisfaction. Alexis then outlined the legal strategy. First, they would file a temporary restraining order, TRO, and a preliminary injunction to prevent the Jenkins from making any further changes to the house or occupying it. This would also put a hold on the sale. The Jenkins are likely going to be as angry as you are when they realize the extent of the fraud, Alexis explained. They'll want their money back from Cunningham. We'll try to leverage that. They could be key witnesses for us. David agreed. It felt strange to think of the people who had unwittingly invaded his home as potential allies, but he understood the logic. The following week was a flurry of legal activity. The court granted the TRO, effectively stopping the Jenkins from moving any more furniture into David's house. The Jenkins, now thoroughly alarmed, hired their own legal counsel, a young but sharp attorney named Emily Chen. Emily Chen immediately reached out to Alexis. My clients are devastated, she said over the phone. They used their life savings to buy that house. What are your next steps? We're moving for a summary judgment against Brenda Cunningham, Alexis explained. Given the clear evidence of fraud and the non-existence of the HOA, I don't see this going to a full trial. Your clients are victims, just like mine. We can work together to ensure Brenda Cunningham faces the full consequences of her actions, and your clients get their money back. Emily agreed. The idea of a united front against the fraudulent Karen, as David had started referring to Brenda Cunningham, was appealing. The Jenkins eventually moved their belongings out of David's house, placing them in temporary storage, their dreams of a new home shattered, replaced by a bitter sense of betrayal. The court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation, a quiet hum of murmurs preceding the entrance of Judge Eleanor Vance, a no-nonsense jurist known for her meticulous attention to detail and intolerance for frivolous litigation. David sat beside Alexis at the plaintiff's table, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He felt exposed, vulnerable, yet also filled with a righteous anger. Across the aisle, sat Brenda Cunningham. She was exactly as David had imagined, a woman in her late 50s, with an aggressively styled blonde bouffant, a too bright pink pantsuit, and an air of self-importance that seemed utterly misplaced. She looked around the courtroom with an air of aggrieved innocence, occasionally whispering indignantly to her public defender, because, it turned out, she couldn't afford a real lawyer after Alexis had put liens on her assets. At the other table, the Jenkins sat with their lawyer, Emily Chen, looking pale and anxious. They were the unwitting pawns in this bizarre real estate scam, and their presence underscored the sheer audacity of Cunningham's scheme. Judge Vance entered, and everyone rose. Be seated, she commanded, her voice firm. Good morning. We are here for the motion for summary judgment in Miller v. Cunningham et al. Ms. Thorne, you may proceed. Alexis rose, her posture straight, her voice clear and resonant. Thank you, Your Honor. This case, at its heart, is a brazen act of fraud and a gross violation of property rights. My client, Mr. David Miller, has been the sole, rightful owner of the property at 1427 Elm Street for the past 15 years. He has paid his taxes, maintained his property, and has never, at any point, been a member of, or subject to, any homeowners association. She paused, letting that sink in. Yet, in an act of staggering audacity, the defendant, Brenda Cunningham, purporting to be the president of a non-existent entity she fraudulently labeled the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, executed a quitclaim deed for Mr. Miller's property, claiming it had been abandoned due to neglect, specifically overgrown grass. She then proceeded to sell Mr. Miller's home to unsuspecting third parties, the Jenkins, who are also victims in this egregious scheme. Alexis then laid out the evidence, piece by painstaking piece. Exhibit A, certified documents from the county clerk's office, definitively stating that no entity named Meadowbrook Homeowners Association had ever been registered in the county. A ghost organization, Your Honor, Alexis stated. Exhibit B, David's original deed, mortgage statements, property tax records spanning 15 years, utility bills, all proving his uninterrupted ownership and residency. Exhibit C, affidavits from David's neighbors, attesting to his continuous presence and maintenance of the property. Mr. Miller was on a 2-week vacation when Ms. Cunningham initiated this fraudulent sale, Alexis informed the judge. Hardly an act of abandonment. Exhibit D, the fraudulent deed presented by Brenda Cunningham to the Jenkins, which Alexis then showed to be riddled with inconsistencies and forged signatures, specifically the alleged notary stamp. Our forensic analysis of the notary stamp indicates it is a counterfeit, Alexis calmly stated. Exhibit E, the business registration for Cunningham Property Solutions, highlighting her lack of a real estate license or any authority to conduct property sales. Your Honor, Alexis concluded, Ms. Cunningham had no legal standing, no authority, and no right to sell Mr. Miller's property. This was a criminal act of fraud, plain and simple. We are asking the court to void the fraudulent sale, to quiet title in Mr. Miller's name, to order Ms. Cunningham to pay full restitution to the Jenkins for their financial losses, and to award Mr. Miller significant punitive damages for the emotional distress, the violation of his privacy, and the sheer audacity of Ms. Cunningham's actions. Furthermore, we request that this court refer Ms. Cunningham's case for criminal prosecution. Brenda Cunningham's public defender, a harried-looking man named Mr. Harrison, stood up, looking visibly uncomfortable. Your Honor, my client, Ms. Cunningham, acted, she believed, in good faith. She has been a long-standing advocate for community beautification. She observed what she believed to be a neglected property and, in her capacity as a community organizer, sought to remedy a blight on the neighborhood. She genuinely believed she had the authority to act on behalf of the community. Judge Vance leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Mr. Harrison, are you seriously suggesting that your client believed she had the authority to unilaterally declare a property abandoned and sell it, without any due process, without any legal registration of her association, and without any attempt to contact the actual owner? Do you have a shred of evidence that the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association is a legitimate entity, or that Ms. Cunningham followed any legal procedure for property abandonment? Mr. Harrison stammered. Your Honor, Ms. Cunningham, she is passionate about community standards. She believed the overgrown grass was a clear sign of neglect. Mr. Harrison, Judge Vance interrupted, her voice now sharp, passion does not negate the law. The evidence presented by Ms. Thorne is compelling. There is no legitimate HOA. There was no abandonment. There was no legal right to sell this property. The fraudulent deed is clear. This is not a matter of community standards. This is a matter of criminal fraud. She turned her gaze to Brenda Cunningham, who visibly flinched. Ms. Cunningham, do you have anything to add? Any documents, any evidence to counter what has been presented? Brenda Cunningham, her face pale beneath her too bright makeup, suddenly stood up, eyes wide. Your Honor. I was only trying to help. The lawn was disgraceful. It was bringing down property values. I had to do something. People neglect their homes, and nobody does anything. I created the HOA to make our neighborhood better. Her voice rose, becoming shrill and defensive. I contacted a notary. They said it was all fine. I just wanted to make things right. Judge Vance listened, a flicker of something akin to disbelief crossing her features. Ms. Cunningham, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, the legal process for declaring a property abandoned and selling it is rigorous and complex. It involves court orders, public notices, and genuine efforts to contact the owner. It is not something you can simply decide to do because you believe a lawn is disgraceful. Furthermore, fabricating an HOA and forging documents is a serious criminal offense. She paused, scanning the courtroom. Based on the undisputed evidence presented by Ms. Thorne, it is abundantly clear that Brenda Cunningham engaged in a fraudulent scheme to unlawfully divest Mr. David Miller of his property. There is no genuine issue of material fact for trial. Therefore, I find in favor of the plaintiff. A collective sigh of relief swept through David's side of the courtroom. The sale of 1427 Elm Street to Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins is hereby declared null and void, Judge Vance continued, striking her gavel with a decisive thud. Title to the property is immediately quieted in the name of Mr. David Miller. Ms. Brenda Cunningham is ordered to immediately vacate any claim or interest in said property. Furthermore, Ms. Cunningham is ordered to fully reimburse Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins for the full purchase price of the property, plus all associated closing costs, moving expenses, and any other demonstrable financial losses incurred as a direct result of her fraudulent actions. Additionally, Ms. Cunningham is ordered to pay Mr. David Miller punitive damages for the egregious violation of his rights, the emotional distress caused, and the sheer maliciousness of her actions. The exact amount of these damages will be determined at a separate hearing if an agreement is not reached. Finally, this court will be referring Ms. Cunningham's actions to the District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation and prosecution for fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. Brenda Cunningham gasped, her face turning ashen. Her public defender tried to put a comforting hand on her arm, but she shook him off, looking utterly defeated. The judge's words were a hammer blow, shattering her delusional world. The court is adjourned, Judge Vance announced, and rose. Underscore 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 underscore. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The Jenkins, though devastated by their loss, were immensely relieved to know they would be getting their money back, thanks to the court order and Alexis's swift actions in seizing Cunningham's meager assets. They immediately began the process of filing a claim against Cunningham and her defunct, Property Solutions, company. For David, the first feeling was an overwhelming sense of relief, followed by a profound exhaustion. He had won. His house was his again, legally and unequivocally. The court order was clear, the judgment absolute. He returned to 1427 Elm Street a few days later, the sold sign already gone, removed by Alexis's team. The moving truck of the Jenkins was gone too, their belongings having been carefully stored away. The house felt eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaotic scene just a week prior. He walked through each room, a sense of reclaiming washing over him. His furniture was still there, his books on the shelves, his old coffee mug on the counter. Nothing had been damaged, which was a small mercy. But the experience had left an indelible mark. The sense of violation, the terror of seeing strangers claim his most sacred space, lingered like a phantom ache. He found himself checking the front yard more often, peering out his windows, a new layer of vigilance added to his routine. Brenda Cunningham's downfall was swift and spectacular. The criminal charges came quickly, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. Her public defender couldn't mount a credible defense against the forged documents, the non-existent HOA, and the numerous witnesses, including the Jenkins, who testified to her deception. The media, catching wind of the absurd and audacious nature of the HOA Karen, who sold a man's house for overgrown grass, had a field day. Local news channels broadcast stories of her scheme, painting her as a suburban supervillain with a twisted sense of civic duty. She faced multiple felony charges and, unable to make bail, was held in jail awaiting trial. The civil judgment, coupled with impending criminal penalties, effectively bankrupted her, leaving her with nothing but the legal fallout. As for David, life slowly returned to normal. He found himself more appreciative of the simple things, his quiet mornings, the familiar creak of his floorboards, the sight of his own roses blooming. He even hired a landscaping service to keep his lawn immaculate, not out of fear of another Karen, but out of a newfound appreciation for the sense of order and control over his own domain. One evening, a few weeks after the court ruling, Alexis came over for dinner. They sat on David's back porch, a gentle breeze rustling through the oak tree. "You know," David said, taking a sip of his beer, "I still can't believe it happened. It felt like something out of a bad movie." Alexis chuckled. "Oh, it was. And believe me, in my line of work, you see some truly bizarre stuff. But Brenda Cunningham, she takes the cake. Convinced herself she was a community crusader while actively committing felony fraud. It's almost darkly humorous, in a way, how delusional she was." "Humorous for you, maybe," David grumbled, though a small smile played on his lips. "I was living a nightmare." "And now you're not," Alexis said, patting his arm. "And you got your house back, and that Karen is facing the music. Justice was served, David. And sometimes, that's the best ending a story can have." David looked out at his backyard, at the familiar fence line, the swing set he hadn't used in years but kept for sentimental reasons. It was all still there. His. The ordeal had been a harsh reminder of how fragile security could be, but also of the power of fighting for what was rightfully yours. He raised his glass to Alexis. "To you, Velvet Hammer. And to not letting the Karens of the world win." Alexis clinked her glass against his, a knowing smirk on her face. "To that, David. To that." The suburban evening settled around them, peaceful and, finally, truly his own again.